Shalom. This is Mary Omni from the World Government House of King David, Holy Covenant Constitutional Enforcer. This is a Republic Notice. The title of this Republic Notice is called Blacks Are in First Place as Native Status. Blacks are in first place as native status. It's 2013, the end of December, and there is quite a few things that I want to go over in this video, but it basically comes to the point where now we have to reveal at the time of revelation that, this using of native language, propaganda, fronting, to try to cover up black constitutionality that proves 400 years of investment and labor in America will no longer provide a buffer for white majority and all other Hispanics and Asians and everybody who's coming to who came to America, and each house they own, their jobs and everything has the black baby sacrifice. That's the black baby's blood. Their homes is black baby's blood, because the Constitution has 3/5. That right there tell you it's been a 60% investment from the beginning. And by the time 1868 came, that investment had reached the humanity, since they was then now considered 100%. So that's 100% because they had the Bill of Rights as sovereign God, sovereign human beings by 1868 when they became constitutional citizens. So now this 60% becomes 100%. Now the 60% don't disappear, because blacks are non-consenters, so they didn't consent for it to disappear. Their labor and initial investment will not disappear. Instead, it will add on to the 100% of their humanity. So we're talking about 160% of black wealth per black man, 160 per black woman, 160 per black boy, 160 per black girl. So we're talking about 640% wealth holdings of America, 640% by 1868, when black wealth was returned to them, their person was returned to them. The human capital investment in themselves was returned to them by constitutional supremacy and non-consent jurisdiction to do otherwise with it. In other words, it didn't belong to anyone else. Now what happened was, there was a case called Ilk versus Ilk, where the natives wanted to claim a 14th Amendment right, and they was told by the then Supreme Court, which was prior to 1871, the U.S. corporation. See, I'm going to talk prior to 1871, because that's a demarcation point, because that point was the U.S. corporation mule sealed off the Supreme contract with the Bill of Rights with the 1 through 15 amendments. So Ilk versus Ilk, which is this native who wanted to claim the 14th Amendment, and they was told, no, you are what you would call a foreign nation, or not a foreign nation, a foreign jurisdiction. So you are not of the non-consent jurisdiction. See, they was not of the non-consent jurisdiction. Like the 14th Amendment, blacks inherited the 14th. They couldn't consent for it, so they was part of the non-consent jurisdiction. And anyone who could consent or could go take something to court to try to say that they had this non-consent jurisdiction, they was saying, no, you're in a foreign jurisdiction, because this is non-consent jurisdiction here. Now, the reason natives were considered a foreign jurisdiction is because they considered themselves sovereign nations. And why they wanted to claim the 14th that came as a result of 300 to 400 years of slavery is why anyone would want to claim something if they think it's a benefit to claiming it, okay? So the first case of the 14th was someone who considered themselves a Native American, and they was told they was a foreign jurisdiction. Now, the reason is because they were consenters. Now, what made them consenters is by 1868, they had consented to treaties of 1866. And in these treaties, they said that they're now signing with the Union. They made blacks, same, self, and kind, part of their nation with full nation rights. So blacks had the full nation rights to the Cherokee, the Seminole, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Creek nations, which were the major landholders. And you can look this up on the internet. Blacks are in all 1866 treaties. So, and blacks didn't consent to go into them. So they was inheritors. They always inherit. They don't consent because they was born here with chains, and they did the work. And these native tribes who made them part of the nation knew that they were non-consenters. And this is why the chiefs sat down, the chiefs of these nations, they sat down with the Union heads, and they said, well, we wanted to put God's sovereignty in these treaties, so we going to go ahead and put the non-consenters, who are the God sovereign, so they can non-consent that all this land of the natives is non-consented through blacks, through black Americans. So the non-consent jurisdiction is through black Americans. So when a native ilk tried to claim the 14th jurisdiction, he was rejected because he was not a non-consenter. He was a consenter according to the nations and the tribes, because the nations and tribes had already identified blacks as the non-consenters in 1866. And ilk was the first case of the 14th, so it had to be after 1866. It had to be 1868 or later, because that's when the 14th was constitutionalized. So that native was just told they were not of the jurisdiction to claim the 14th. Now, this is why blacks are first in line. You need to understand that this is why blacks are first in any native status claims, that blacks are first, because the tribal chiefs and the Union made them first. The tribal chiefs and the Union made them first. The tribal chiefs knew that they held blacks in slavery. They knew blacks deserved something and some kind of status from being the leftover of those who were enslaved in native tribes. There were a lot of black natives. And so the chiefs finally sat down with the Union, and the 1866 treaties with contractual enforcement rights in every state, because blacks became national also with contractual enforcement rights automatic. Blacks don't have to do nothing. It's just automatically enforced contractual supremacy rights as national, as the only national citizens in every state and in every jurisdiction and in every territory. And the native chiefs sat down at the table with the Union, and this is our American family and how it was worked out. So some smart behind in one of the native tribes said, well, I want to claim their 14th since they can claim nation status under us. And so the Supreme Court said, no, well, you can't claim the 14th because it goes to non-consenters only. See, blacks couldn't consent. When in 1866, blacks couldn't consent because they were considered 3/5. So they inherited everything. So, and they inherited their constitutionality. So they became the non-consenters constitutionally. They became the non-consenting nation in 1866. And they were the non-consenters put in the tribal treaties, the best treaties the tribal chiefs got smart finally and made to thwart off the white man and foreign regimes, was to put blacks in there as non-consenters, because then the blacks in the treaties of 1866 as non-consenters will match their constitutionality as non-consenters. So both of these contracts will reinforce and support each other. You got the 1866 civil rights, which is the only true civil rights, 1866 civil rights, where it's automatic enforcement of supreme contract. You got the 1866 treaties where non-consenters are put in there as nationholds of the different tribes. Like I said, the Seminoles, the Cherokees, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, and the Creek, which is most of the southwest border. And so you have the 1866 civil rights enforcement of them being, blacks being a nation, a God-sovereign nation, then put in the 1866 tribal chiefs, put them in all their treaties, and then you have them all constitutionalized in 1868. So the reason I'm giving you this background is because whites and Hispanics and all this flooding in there, when blacks start talking about their constitutionality and their investment and their 400 years fruit of labor and that they have rights to this land, the first thing they do is call themselves throwing natives in their face. See, natives are used as a front, just like in Alaska is what they call Alaskan natives, okay? And these Alaskan natives are used as a front to trample and steal constitutional wealth and oil from black Americans, because these natives are at consent that they have no constitutionality. They're basically contract with the U.S. corporation, which don't have one amendment. So it's not a matter of, well, were you here when they bought Russia, or whose was here when, you know, you can look in any history in any land of Russia and all that, and that will come up with, that was close to Judea. That was mostly black land. Okay, so blacks was on all land first, because blacks are the original, the indigenous, and the native earthlings. Okay, and any laws, the Dawes Act, and all that stuff, basically was made for blacks. Okay, they didn't want to tell people this up front because we had just got over Civil War, but everything was secured through blacks because they was non-consenters. Even all native land was secured through black Americans because they're non-consenters. Even the beginning of the Constitution was secured through black Americans at the beginning when they put them in as 3/5. So when everybody came and started saying, well, we want a treaty this, and and the Moors wanted a treaty this, wanted a treaty this, wanted a treaty. Well, they was making treaties with a jurisdiction that consented to slavery, so they was making treaties with slavery because you had consent to involuntary servitude going on. And so what these people was doing who made contracts early on, like in the 1700s, was consenting themselves to involuntary servitude. Okay, so what I'm saying to you is that the propaganda of using natives, anytime you hear the word natives, just understand blacks is in all native contracts. Blacks is in all land contracts in America. So whenever you talk about native, you're really talking about blacks. Nobody has a higher contract than blacks. The Alaskan natives cannot protect any land in Alaska because they are under incorporate doctrines, which means full debt contracts. These so-called Pale natives who got this 1/8 and 2/3 and all this, they're under incorporate doctrine debt contracts where they consent to debt and theft, and they all gave up their nation status in 1924 when they wanted so-called native citizenship, and the globalists tricked them into a 1924 fictitious citizenship where they contract with in corporate doctrine contracts for fiat money. See, the only one who couldn't do this was black Americans because they're in the supreme contract as non-consenters. They didn't have to beg for a citizenship in 1924. They had a constitutional citizenship in 1868, and they had a constitutional citizenship really in 1866 as national citizens. It was constitutionalized in 1868. So if you stick with me, I'll prove to you where you can't move beyond a shadow of a doubt that blacks are the natives. So using this propaganda of natives to cover up black 400 years investments, and the fact that native tribes held blacks in slavery too, and the native chiefs put them in charge of all native lands to protect the land. Because as you can see, In Alaska, they keep hiding behind natives who mainly have mass disease of alcoholism and fetal alcoholism, and they keep hiding behind them to steal the New Jerusalem, which is Alaska, which was purchased in between the 13th and 14th Amendment. These are black amendments in which Alaska is purchased. But they keep talking about Alaska natives who are under in corporate doctrines,